the world, through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast, brought to you by 7M Ventures and Andrew Womack Ministries.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Karen Conrad, and I want to welcome you to the Truth and Liberty livecast tonight. We have got a great program. We have Joel Grewe with us from the Joshua generation, and Richard Harris. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, Karen. It's great to be here.
Gosh, we've got so much information to share with you tonight, and I think you're really going to enjoy hearing from Joel because he works with young people, high schools, public schools, and private, and he gets the true American history out there in civics, and we'll be hearing a lot more from Joel. But I want to encourage you, if you've got friends and family that are interested in how to help influence this nation, you want to watch tonight, so please share this. Also, this is an interactive broadcast, and we take questions from you. We love to hear from you. And isn't our audience just incredible,
It's
Richard?
amazing. They are smart.
They are smart, yeah. So they always give us questions that are a little bit challenging, and it's really nice because we get to hear what's on your mind.
That's right.
And we try to answer those difficult questions. Andrew is taking the night off tonight, but he will be back next week. So he just says hi to everyone, and let's just bring you up to date here on a few things that are happening. First of all, if you want to ask a question and you're watching on social media, it's really easy. Just go ahead and enter that question into the comment section. And also, while we love social media, we do get censored once in a while. Would you say that, Richard?
Absolutely.
And so if you want to make sure that you can watch this broadcast uninterrupted, go watch it at our new website, truthandliberty.net. We've just done some really amazing updates, including a live news feed, right, Richard?
That's right. Yep.
And can we take a moment and share with them your latest blog that just
Absolutely.
went out on the website?
Yeah, so we just did a blog last week. The name of it is Martin Luther King, and then the rest of it has to do with identity politics, the manifest danger of identity politics. So I really encourage you guys to take a look at that. I think it might give you some insight on what happened with the Covington Catholic School incident at the Lincoln Memorial.
Awesome. So you can go ahead and check that out at truthandliberty.net. Also, you can watch this live stream there. And if you've got questions and you're watching on the website, go ahead and enter those questions into the chat section. We've got a whole team that is standing by, and they're ready to send those questions forward onto my iPad. Also, I want to remind you that this is a viewer-supported broadcast. First of all, thank you so much for so many of you that are supporting us financially. If this is something that God has put on your heart to support, you can give by going to truthandliberty.net, and you can click on Donate, or you can call our phone center at 719-635-1111, and you can donate. And also, we're here to pray for you. So if you've got questions about what's going on, and we're going to be talking about what recently happened in New York, so we want to be here for you. Also, one of the benefits of subscribing to Truth and Liberty is to find out who our upcoming guests are, to get Richard's blog, but also we have a free giveaway every week. And last week we gave away, boy, that was a good program last week.
Yes,
actually, if you did not catch it, go to truthandliberty.net and go on the iCarves page. And we had Kamal Salim on, and he's a former jihadist. It was very eye-opening. So I want to congratulate Bart Norton, who won his book, The Blood of Lambs. And this week we are giving away Andrew's A Better Way to Pray. Oh my goodness, this book, as Andrew said, you'll either love it or it'll make you mad.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm telling you, this is one of, I always say this, it's like my favorite book. Every book of Andrew's is my favorite. But this one, if you want to learn how to pray effectively, this is an amazing, amazing book. And to qualify to win, just subscribe at truthandliberty.net. Also, we have so much going on at this ministry, and I want to share with you a couple upcoming events. First of all, we have got the Orlando Gospel Truth Conference, which is February 7th through the 9th at the Hilton Orlando. We've got Andrew and Dwayne Sheriff. So if you are in that area, go ahead and register for that at awmi.net. We've got the Men's Advance that's coming up on March 14th through the 16th. I'm sure you'll be going there with your boys, Richard.
Absolutely. I wouldn't miss it.
Oh, it's going to be awesome. We've got James Brown and Tony Dungy, and you can register at www.councilman caresmensadvance.com. Also, we've got the Cares Bible College Campus Days coming up in Woodland Park, April 3rd to the 5th. And we've got David, King of Jerusalem, back by popular demand. It's an amazing musical. And that's going to be the weekend before Easter, April 12th through the 13th. And you can register and purchase tickets for that at awmi.net/events. So we have got a lot that we want to talk about tonight, and let's introduce Joel.
All right.
So Joel, we want to welcome you and introduce you to our audience with Generation Joshua. So can you just give us a little bit of a recap and let the audience know exactly what you do with that organization?
It'd be my pleasure. Karen and Richard, thank you very much for the invitation. Giving me a minute to talk about what we do. I admit I love it. To answer your question shortly, Generation Joshua is a civics education project. It was started by the Homeschool Legal Defense Association about 10, 15 years ago or so. They saw a need in our culture of young men and women who truly did not understand what our government was founded on, why it's designed the way it is, what our liberties and freedoms are, where they come from, and how to keep them. And the idea was that we were going to equip the next generation of leaders with the tools and the information and the principles necessary to be able to maintain those freedoms and liberties. So that's what we do. We do it in a dozen different ways, in a dozen different places, but that's the heart and soul behind it.
That's great. And, you know, when we look at the young people and the things that are being taught, Richard, we've talked about this. It's just, it's almost like the liberals are trying to change history.
Yeah, well, I think they clearly are trying to change history. And it's so exciting to see an organization like Generation Joshua that's out there pushing back and actually teaching the truth.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. We do our best to ensure that the young men and women that are part of our program, and which we primarily work with high school students, are equipped not only with an understanding of where we come from, but with the critical thinking and research skills necessary to dig on their own. And one of the reasons we find that so important is that often what you're being handed today may or may not be true. What you see on social media, what you see in people you talk to or on the news, there's a roll of the dice as to whether that's a reliable piece of information or not. And so one of the things that's important is, checking your sources, finding out where they come from, what their background is, which has become a rather important item. We've seen it recently in the news. There's a lot of reporters that probably have a little more egg on their face than they like to tolerate with what we saw recently with the Covington story. A little more research, a little more digging. We call it journalism. I know, novel thought. You might have saved yourself some very awkward moments and some really awkward editorials afterwards if you've done your research. Well, that applies when we're looking at historical facts too, except that it's not an evolving story. Those are determined facts. You can go look them up. But if those don't fit the narrative, it seems all too often people are willing to just discard them. And I'm sorry, truth is truth. History is history. It's what happened. Right. And as a result, we need to know it. We can learn from it. We can strive to do better in many cases. But what happened, happened. And we shouldn't try to change it because it's inconvenient.
A lot of people think that the young generation is not interested in hearing truth. And so we had David and Tim Barton on the live Bible study, I guess that was last week. And one of the things they said is that actually young people, when you ask them questions, will really engage with you. They said, but if you try to tell them everything, and I could hear what you were talking about, Joel, is that you ask them questions, you encourage them to research. So give us an idea, people that might think the young generation is not interested in this, tell us what's really happening with these young people and your interactions with them through the program.
Glad to. First of all, I'll say this. I do not find young people to be uninterested about politics, history, or truth. They find each one of them fascinating and very interesting. What they are annoyed by is someone who will just tell them, here's how it is, now don't question it. And if you're unwilling to take questions, frankly, they often will consider you as someone who is scared to actually defend or wrestle with ideas. Which I think with a lot of the different stories that are peddled out there, if you scratch too hard, they come apart. So I understand the fear. But the reality of this is that I find the next generation is honestly very much longing to know what is true and what is right and how to know it. And if you're willing to wrestle with hard questions and talk about hard things and acknowledge that those are hard, they want to hear from you. If you just brush it away and say, oh, it's not a big deal, it's just this, they will discard you. But if you're willing to acknowledge the hard question and then wrestle with the hard question, they will listen to you for far longer than most people think they will. You'd be amazed what an attention span a high schooler has when you're actually talking about something in a way that he believes is true and authentic and actually values what they think and willing to listen to them and dialogue with them. A posture of like lecturing from on high will turn them off almost immediately. But to sit there and dialogue with them, you will have their attention.
Well, you're probably conveying to them, the message that you want to know what they think, and
that
respect.
You value them.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Often, this is something that's been ongoing for a while. We discard high schoolers, middle schoolers, even early college as people who really don't know anything and really can't make a difference. That's not true. And what it comes across as is dismissive and arrogant. And when you challenge that and you kind of flip that assumption on its head, it's like, no, you have unique gifts and talents and a unique ability to make a difference in ways that often adults cannot. So let's have a serious conversation about what these truths mean in your life. They'll listen.
So Joel, I was looking at the Generation Joshua website, and I had heard of you guys before, but I was not fully aware of all the different things that you do and the ways that you teach young people. I saw clubs and classes and camps. Can you share with the audience a little bit more about exactly how does your ministry operate and all the opportunities that there might be for young people to learn this about our history and so forth?
I would love to. Okay, so Generation Joshua, I kind of gave you the vision and mission a minute ago, but one of the things that makes it unique is, frankly, somewhat the methodology, the way we teach. Most people think of teaching in two forms. There's books and there's lectures, and that's how education happens. But most people actually know that's not the best way to learn. The best way to learn is honestly to do. The more senses you engage, the more kinetic activity that is involved, the better you remember things. And so we took that principle that is really, in a sense, cutting-edge education theory. It's how they're training some of the smartest and brightest people around the world at this point. And we said, how does that apply in context of government? Because government's a really hard one to make hands-on, for lack of better terms. And our solution to it was a series of different immersive and kinetic activities where people do government. Now, it might mean a local club, which we have them all around the country. And these are groups of anywhere from 5 to 80 on the larger side, high school students that'll meet up once a month. They're going to talk about local politics, local issues, national issues, see what their role is in that, maybe find ways that they can serve in their community, be it volunteering or engaging in the civil discourse in their town or county, whatever that is, and essentially develop as responsible citizens, where people see them engaging and then are able to, you're able to meet them. So it might mean that a club is, cleaning up at a local park or helping with a crisis pregnancy center or something like that. And then in November or October, they say, hey, there's an election coming up, we need you to vote. And people look at them and go, well, I know you. You're invested in our community. You care about people around you. And if you believe that it matters that we vote, all right. You obviously aren't just telling me that because you're trying to win something. You actually genuinely care about your community. I'll do that. It actually is a unique voice to high school students and that adults don't have. These are kids who can't vote yet, but then go and ask people to do so. And that's a posture they can ask from that is different and gives them, honestly, a bit of moral weight that we as adults don't have. That's our clubs. And those happen all around the country. We also have online civics classes that you can take in part of. And that is more of the textbook talking format. You need some of that, how to convey a lot of data. And those are definitely options for people to be involved. But the other large initiative we have on the education side is a program that we call iGovern. And it's a week-long intensive where we simulate the federal government for high school students to run. Now, that's kind of terrifying, to be fair.
Did you shut down?
I mean, the most
did you shut down?
Country on the planet to a bunch of high school students and say, have at it, please don't wreck the car. To be honest, what's really scary is they often do pretty good, which tells you something about our current state of politics in America. But we simulate a Congress, a House and a Senate, with the rules of the House and the Senate. We simulate the political process, so you're not just learning the policy making. It's not just how a bill becomes law. We've all seen the cartoon, but in this case, there's the politics of it, the fundraising, the media component. You have to deal with journalists. You have to answer questions. You're being written about in the paper or being interviewed, and they're twisting what you said. Go figure. How do you respond to that? How do you build bridges across party lines when we set ours up so that the House and the Senate are controlled by different parties, because that seems to happen rather regularly in America today? How do you advance good ideas? How do you present concepts in a winsome and compelling way? How do you defend yourself when people say things about you that you don't think are true? How do you win them rather than just essentially fight fire with fire? Is there a way to do that? And there's this blending of the policy and the politics, which there's a lot of programs in America that teach politics, and there's a lot of programs that teach policy. There are very few that put those together. We do that, and we just do it for high school students so that when they actually have the ability to vote, when they're engaged citizens, they actually kind of know what they're doing.
So Joel, do you guys do this at different locations around the country?
We do that in Virginia, right outside DC. In fact, if you come there, we'll head into DC. You're going to meet people. We've had everyone from Mike Pence to, well, there's a whole long list of people who come and speak to our kids. We do it in Ohio, partnering with Cedarville University. And then we also do it in Colorado Springs, actually up in the mountains at a place called Bear Trap Ranch, which is about 9,500 feet up there. So there's a bit of altitude, but it is one of the most spectacular views to get up into the Colorado Rockies. And so we kind of make it a little more accessible across the country for people in different places. It takes a week. They're all during the summer. If you go to generationjoshua.org/iGovern, it'll show you all 4 of those different locations and the dates. There is one special one that we do. It's called iGovern Statecraft. And instead of doing domestic policy and politics, it's foreign policy and politics. So instead of being in Congress or the Senate, you're in the executive, you're working for the president. You might be the Secretary of Defense or the head of the CIA, or maybe the ambassador from Russia or the ambassador from China. There's a functioning model UN, as it were, in that, as well as several other pieces. And it is honestly a one-of-a-kind experience. In learning how our government works and why it works.
Yeah, right. Joel, so when kids go to something like this, it actually sounds fun. I think I'd like to go.
I know.
But when they go, so do you assign them roles? For example, do you have you are going to be Democrats, you're going to be Republicans. Do you assign them to have to argue both sides?
Sort of. Okay. Let me nuance on that. We found that it was best to put people who were new kind of in a random position. But as students come back, because many come back year after year, they're essentially given veterancy where they can start choosing specifically where they go. We don't give them the 2 political parties of today. So you're not going to see the Republicans and the Democrats. We'll give them, essentially, we divide them into 2 colors. Gold and blue, and those become their 2 political parties. And they get to go through the crafting process that happens at the party conventions to make their party platform. They do that too. They have to do their financial plan and their fundraising. They have to do all of the process to make that. And one of the things that becomes important for them is differentiating their party and what they believe from the other one. It's an exercise in methodology and how it works. And they get to own it. And so some of the platforms and ideas they come up with are often going to be silly. Some of them are very serious. And they have to kind of wrestle back and forth with that. And then to bring that flavor of real life in, we bring in members of Congress, leaders in the political arena who can come and speak to the students as people who are doing it as part of their day job, about how that works and the stresses and the challenges and the opportunities that are in it.
Excellent. So, Joel, the youth today, I'm curious about what your observations are, since you interact with them on a daily basis like this. And have you found in your experience that their perspective on history and America's heritage is a little bit skewed for the most part? How do you feel about that?
Skewed is a really interesting way of putting that. What I found 3 different types that show up. There's some that have decided that they're going to learn. And those people honestly have a fairly balanced view, because often it means they've done a lot of independent research. And the people that are willing to go dig for the original sources and read the original papers, they learn a lot. Then you've got the people who just kind of absorbed roughly what they hear, but haven't thought about it. And so when you ask them a question, they'll spit back an answer that they've heard. And then when you ask them a question about that, they kind of look at you and they blink twice and they aren't really sure what to say next, because there's no engagement either way. And then there's other people who have very specific knowledge about very small points in history. And it can, anytime you take a large subject and you take little pieces of it, you can paint, well, any picture.
That's true.
And you take it out of context, and it may be a true fact, but without the larger context, you don't really see how it fits into the thing, and it creates a warped view of history. And we run into that a fair bit. But honestly, the largest and most common group is the ones that haven't thought about it any further. Well, when I teach at a public school, the first 90 minutes of a class that I do, which usually is about a day long, I'll do it for an entire 8-hour day, which gets attention because they want to get out of class. But at the same time, it's one topic for an entire day, which kind of makes them blink twice. But the first 90 minutes is just getting them to think. And once you get them to engage and actually start wrestling with things, all the raw material is there. The creativity, the ingenuity, the things that we expect most people to have some of, it's there.
Well, what I was curious about was whether you're finding that the youth of today, are they being taught things in public schools or even in private Christian schools that are accurate or inaccurate? And what kind of a perception of America's history and heritage are they getting?
Honestly, I think their learning often is at least somewhat distorted. They're, in one sense, they're careful. They try not to present something that didn't happen, but they often lack the rest of the findings. So what they get is, again, just a small part of the story. Right. I do find places where people have learned an honest and true understanding of American history. But those are we'll just say the common public education may not be best known for its quality. And that's not to say there aren't good schools and good teachers. There are, but it's often designed as a system. I admit I'm biased toward homeschooling. I homeschool my kids. I work for, in a sense, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And it gives you that freedom to wrestle with truths and wrestle deeply. And when you're like, I don't know how this part works, go dig and find out. And it's hard to do that in 40-minute classes back to back.
What do you find when you bring the students in? What sort of change are you seeing in them over the course of the week, comparing what they were like when they got in, maybe what they believed, to how they are thinking and what they believe when they leave?
Well, I think you just said it well. They're thinking. That's always good. That's a big step. The other thing you find is that we'll put them through a media presser. We'll have people take their words out of context. We'll have people challenge them with ideas that are very contrary to what they believe. In fact, in one of the programs, we actually have a kind of a DC gala. It's like a lobbying event where there's some sort of large charity and lots of lobbyists and politicians and different interest groups all arrive, and from all around the political spectrum. And they're all pushing their ideas toward these students. And for a couple hours, you learn to swim. And how do you respond to ideas that are not the same as your own? How do you discern what is wise and what is not? And at the end of it, we find people that not only have wrestled with what they believe now and usually have it much firmer held, but also have the courage to share it with other people. Suddenly, it's not as scary talking to someone they don't know. No, I'm not going to let you just tell me what I just said and let you put words in my mouth. I'm going to say, no, what I said was this, not that. And that courage often is what makes them incredibly effective in the public arena. And you see students walk out of it, people that frankly were wallflowers and they knew what they believed, but they couldn't articulate it to anyone else, walking out going, no, I can do this. And you see them at their college campus standing up for what is true or right versus something that is not. Or you see them engaged in their local community, or standing up to say a city council ordinance on crisis pregnancy center labeling, or getting engaged in an issue in their area, whatever that may be, for what is good.
Well, Joel, we homeschool our kids, and I know from our experience that there are just amazing resources out there for parents these days to educate their kids in the true American history and heritage and everything else, for that matter, in creation science and so forth. But there are families, a lot of families, Christian families, that homeschooling is not an option for them for whatever reason. And I'm curious whether you have any thoughts about what can those parents do if their kids are in, say, public school or even a private Christian school that doesn't necessarily emphasize these things. What can they do to make sure that their kids have a solid foundation in civics and in the Christian heritage of this nation?
Well, I would start with have them join Generation Joshua. That's always good.
Of course, that's a given.
That was a softball, Joel. You hit it out of the park. There you go.
I can hit that. But there is, practically, we offer a series of courses and curriculum designed to give you a good foundational understanding of our country. The particular one I'm thinking of is a program called iCitizen. It's a semester-long course. It could be done as part of a homeschool curriculum. We actually have some schools that use it as a curriculum. They asked for copies. We were glad to offer it to them. We have people that take it online as a supplemental piece of education that's just separate from whatever other piece of like their standard education format is. There's ways to educate yourself. It might mean that you're finding good books, well-researched books that are grounded and you're reading on your own, not just because you're assigned to. You're thinking about it. You're talking about it. That dialogue will do a lot to let you question and understand what happened versus maybe what didn't. These are all things that can be done. The other option, frankly, is finding other people who know history. Ask them where they learned it. It might mean that you're looking for books that were published before 1982. Or significantly before that. We wrote the iCitizen curriculum because we couldn't find a good, and we'll say it, Christian and what we would say philosophically conservative view of American citizenship and government that existed after 1982. Wow. We needed something. There was a hole.
What happened in 1982?
Yeah.
I don't know. That was just the last copy we found from a decent producer.
Okay.
And we're like, this isn't good. And we need to provide something that gives you all of those facts and rigorously engages with the ideas. But at the same time, honestly presents the ideas. And so we do that. And from foreign policy to domestic policy, to our process of government, to how you as a citizen are engaged. What are ways that you as a citizen can have an impact on your government that's more than protesting in the streets or yelling on Twitter? There are a few other things you can do, believe it or not. In fact, most everything else works better. But if you've never encountered those things, you don't know that. So we do that. That's a great resource. There's a dozen others. You've already mentioned people that you have on your show that are great resources for learning this sort of thing. You guys have a coalition of them that people can reference. Just on your website alone, there's a dozen links to places people can go to learn and to study. For us, we're ready to send them if they're high school. And to give them kind of a robust understanding, not just of the truth and where it comes from, but how that actually does something in their life. It changes things. That's what I think, I would argue that's what makes us special, particularly for high school students.
That's great. Joel and Richard, it just seems like in our college campuses now, to speak up for truth, I mean, people have to be strong, and sometimes they almost have to risk their lives, it almost seems, certainly their safety in many situations. So what I'm hearing from you is you're really helping them to understand what they believe, which is going to give them the strength and the passion to stand up for what they believe, but considering what's happening in our liberal college campuses right now. Richard, I might start with you on this. How would you recommend that parents help their children and grandchildren to stand up for what's right, to make a difference in these areas?
Boy, that's a great question, Karen. I think the statistics are really alarming about how many kids from Christian families actually renounce or lose their faith after going to secular university. So, I can tell you that as a parent myself of college-age son and another one who's turning 18 this week, actually, we encourage our kids. First of all, we're homeschooling and we're trying with everything we have to give them that solid foundation in a biblical worldview and even engage our kids, constantly on issues of the day to provoke discussions and that kind of thing. But we're encouraging them to explore other avenues for post-high school education besides a secular university. And for example, here at Charis Bible College, I've told my sons, guys, I know this may not be all of your education here at Charis, but come here and get at least 1 year and maybe 2 years where you're going to be grounded in the Word of God, and it's going to enable you to be able to stand against the philosophies of this world once you go out into more of a secular education. And I'm sure there's other strategies for it, but that's kind of how we're doing it right now.
Yeah, that's great. Joel, what would you recommend, and what do you encourage your students to do when they go forward into college?
Well, two things. First of all, give them a foundation of truth before they're in college. There was a study that was recently done by the Heritage Foundation that found that the majority of young women graduating high school self-identified as a liberal feminist. That was high school, not college. We have, as a conservative movement, begun to engage on the college level in a battle for truth. And the response was that they said, fine, we'll just jump in front of you. And so they went to high school.
Wow.
And we can have that fight there, and we actually have a lot of good resources. There's great groups that are out there that work on college campuses and work with college students to give them the resources, the evidence, the knowledge to back up their truth claims. Mm-hmm. But if no one wants that information, that's not going to do any good, which means when those students are high school students, have the hard conversations there, the ones that you as mom and dad would rather not have, and that makes your kid's face go red and it's really awkward and there's a lot of stuttering back and forth. These conversations, have them. Because then those conversations happen with other people and the kid's not floored or flabbergasted. They have thoughts about them already. They have answers to these questions, and they can wrestle with it. I remember in a class several years ago, okay. But the teacher asked, what is the purpose of life? Big, deep philosophical question. And it was just one of those snap answers where you blurt it out and you realize, so I'm a homeschooler, I forget to raise my hand. And it was like, well, to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And if you recognize the creed, you'll know where that comes from. And he kind of looked at me, and the rest of the room kind of looked at me, and I'm like, oh, sorry. You kind of put your head back down. And he's like, wow, I haven't had someone answer that quickly on anything in a long time. And unfortunately for a lot of us, we can't answer that question that easily, not as easily as you can. Well, it's not that hard if you've done the learning. If you've thought about it in advance. So think about it in advance, have the conversations early. I remember growing up that I grew up on a farm, and that meant that it was an hour drive to anything. So my dad took me everywhere, and he spent an hour of conversation in and out every day.
In the car.
And to be honest, I didn't realize how incredibly valuable that was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Until now I have my own 3 sons, and I'm seeing the impact of this, and I'm running into kids and students from very broken homes and all sorts of shattered places, and they've never seen that before. I'm like, I don't know how you survive without it. I can barely tread water on my own with all of that. And if you have the capacity to pour that into your students' lives, do it. Have those serious conversations. Let them ask you anything, as awkward as it is, and then answer them seriously. Mm-hmm. They will thank you for it.
I think that's great, Joel. I think grandparents, too, have a lot that they can do. I just find, too, like with my son, I mean, he's got such a great relationship with my dad. And my dad is able to impart things to him that he may not receive from mom, right? So I would just...
You may not want to hear it. That's true.
Yeah. So I would encourage, if you're a grandparent or a great-grandparent or an aunt or an uncle, who in your family can you help to disciple? One of the things that David Barton and Tim were talking about is if we disciple one person, we can literally change the world. And so a lot of times we've got these youth, these children right in our own families.
Right. Yeah.
It's true.
That's something we can do. That's great, Joel. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit here. And I want to take a moment, and Richard, I'll have you kind of lead this off, but we just had such sad news coming out of New York this week. And so, Richard, can you kind of just give the audience a recap? I'm sure they've heard about it, but kind of really the depth as to what happened in New York this last week.
Right. Well, basically what happened is that the state of New York passed a law, and the governor signed it, that legalized abortion in most cases up to the point of live birth, essentially embracing partial birth abortion, if you will. And it's one of the most radical, I don't think you can even call it pro-choice, right? It's pro-abortion measures in the world. And then they celebrated that with clapping and cheering, and then the governor ordered that the spire on the Empire State Building be lit up in pink. And, you know, they called the bill something about reproductive health rights or something like that. I don't know what reproduction has to do with it if you're killing the baby that you produced. But anyway, it's very sad, very tragic. And then I've also heard that there are other states where, extreme progressives are in control now that are going to be following suit with similar measures. So we're in an interesting time, I think, Karen, because you see, on the one hand, some states are growing stronger and stronger in favor of abortion, and other states are growing stronger and stronger in favor of life. For example, Iowa had passed a heartbeat bill saying it's illegal to have an abortion after a heartbeat is detected. And then Ohio, the newest governor there, the former governor Kasich had vetoed that same measure. The new governor says, put it on my desk and I'll sign it. And we've got a number of states passing strong measures, like Texas, for example, restricted Medicaid funding to Planned Parenthood. Some good news there is the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals held last week that is constitutional and is legal. Now that may make its way all the way to Supreme Court, but this battle on life is intensifying, just as the worldviews are intensifying and people are becoming more and more cemented. So we're definitely engaged in a war on this subject.
And Joel, we do hear reports that the young generation is one of the most pro-life generations. And so can you give us just a little feedback? Are you hopeful with this?
Very.
Oh,
very.
good.
So not to contrast the negativity, let me give you maybe some hope on this.
Great.
First of all, I have found the younger the generation, the more they're pro-life.
Wow.
In fact, it makes logical sense for them. They see a value there in each individual person. And we've honestly, the left has a problem with their ideas, but they've talked about how each individual person is unique and whatever they believe and whatever their background is, they should be protected and valued, unless they're not born yet, in which case people kill them. It actually doesn't work. They have a philosophical problem, and the youngest generations have picked up on that, and they've decided, no, all life is valuable. It's not like, an overwhelming majority yet, but it is a majority. And that's honestly, you want to find pro-abortion people in America. Sadly, the older the person is, the more likely they're going to be in favor of it. The younger they get, the less likely they're willing to tolerate it, which I find very encouraging. In fact, and this is kind of a bit of an upset, but I actually find the fact that New York had to go to great effort to pass this and that it was a priority in a weird way encouraging. And here's why. The only reason you're going to pass that is if you are very, very worried that Roe is going down.
Right, yeah.
And I think it's going to happen. I'm not quite sure when, but I think it's going to happen sooner than most people think. I tell my students that I believe they are going to see the end of Roe v. Wade in America.
Wow.
And I that one's personal to me. It really is. I'm one of those kids that statistically shouldn't be alive. I was the one that, had the mom who was 13, who was raped. And statistically, that's what you have abortion for, is to get rid of that problem.
Wow.
She chose
Joel.
not to in my case.
Wow.
She put me up for adoption.
So compelling.
And that,
Joel.
let's just say that that makes this an issue that I care a lot about. And I love the signs I'm seeing in the generation I work with for life.
Wow.
I think we're moving in the right direction. And I think we're going to keep moving in that direction until we see the end of that atrocity.
Oh,
that's
Joel,
fantastic.
that is just amazing. And here, I love that. That is such a story.
That really is.
And a testimony. And look what you're doing to influence. Okay, well, we have got some really good questions coming in. And so we're going to take a moment to answer some questions. And so I'm going to go ahead and start with this one that's specific for you, Joel. And this came in from our chat. I think this is kind of neat. The question is, do you have classes for adults?
No, I do not. I'm sorry. Now, if parents want to join and take the classes with their kids, they do, and that's fine. In fact, with several of the courses, we've seen students who take the course, and ironically, at least for the ones that we do online, we have somewhere you can actually do live stream talking to the different professors and teachers as it goes along. Ironically, mom or dad is in the room every time, and they're learning right along with their children, which I think is a remarkable reflection on the fact that, at least for some adults, they know they don't know it.
Yes.
And they want their students to know it, but they also want to learn at the same time. That's fine. But our classes are designed for high school students. There are some great resources for adults. We have the same question as to whether they come to the camps. I'm sorry, insurance says there's got to be an age limit, but I would love to offer that. There is a lot of educational resources for adults, but we are designed for high school.
Okay, very, very good. And then Ghostwriter 316, who is coming in on our Andrew Womack Ministries chat, asks this: do you have a program for getting the average churchgoer to think?
Oh, well, of a sort. We do not do specifically church-based ministry. We partner with some great organizations that do, that work in there. Most often what we find is that, we did this a couple of years ago, we have a program called Student Action Teams, where young men and women will actually go and work in a race. They'll actually work on behalf of candidates or on ideas. And one of the things that we find very compelling is when they're working in their home area and they go knock the doors and they're talking to their churchgoers and they're handing out literature, or they're saying, here's the election issues that are up, here's the votes that are going to matter, here's what Scripture says about it. And then maybe they stop there and say, I'm not telling you how to vote, but I'm saying you need to. And I'm saying you need to vote in an informed way. And often we find that the young people doing that present a rather compelling challenge to their parents, or to their parents' friends who may not be as involved as their conscience tells them they should, but they just somehow don't make time for it. And then a 14-year-old says, I can't vote yet, but I'm very concerned about the future of my country. Can you? Oh, that'll move people.
That would have an impact.
Yeah, that'll get you.
Very
There's
good.
a little bit of guilt with that because we all know that we should be doing it. And we don't sometimes. Well,
true.
Sometimes it just needs to have a 14-year-old with braids going, excuse me, can you please do what you know you need to do? It can be very compelling.
That's great, Joel. So we have Patif 210, which is also on the AWN chat. And Patif asks this: the public school system is a massive socialist induction tool. They no longer teach academics. Is there anything that can be done about that?
Several things. Yes, there is. Different states operate different rules for their public schools. So ironically, in Virginia, we're invited in. We get to come. And we run these government simulation programs we have, which are these 1 or 2 day programs for public school students. Does that fix socialized education? No. But at least in Virginia, the law is such that it is willing to not only tolerate, but is willing to encourage having a variety of views come in, and kind of that idea of the marketplace of ideas. If anything that takes students and challenges them to think and to engage, frankly allows them to move beyond just the here's what you believe, here's what you believe, here's what you believe. And then the question is, why and where does that come from and what are the consequences of that? And we challenge students that way. To fix the socialized education system as a whole, I think probably requires being engaged in your local government, getting involved in your local school board, running for office, terrifying thought that it may be. In fact, we have students that have come out of our program that decided that the schooling in their county mattered, that even if they were homeschooled or they were private school or public school, they're going to get involved. I've got students that are now on school boards They've graduated the program.
Great.
They're actually in governance, trying to work to better the education system there. They said, we're going to take this to heart. I mean, that's why I got involved in my town government.
Yeah.
One of my students saw, let's just call it a scandal or a bit of a mess, and they actually came to my house with a copy of the Washington Post, which when my little town manages to make it on front of the Washington Post, that's not, we don't like it to be a bad thing. And it was not a complimentary article, let's put it that way. And he walked in, and he's like, Joel, is this your town? You know, he holds up the paper and, well, yeah, that's our town. He goes, so you talk about it, and then he goes, no, it's more like you preach about how important it is for good people to be involved in government. And if good people aren't involved in government, then bad things happen. Do you believe that? Yeah, I do. He goes, so what are you going to do about it?
Wow.
Like, there's a short pause, and I'm like, I guess I'm going to run for office then. And you're now my campaign manager. Congratulations. And he's like, that was not part of the plan. And lo and behold, he did. In fact, an entire team of students kind of came around that, and they saw the issue, and they were committed to being engaged in fixing a broken system. And did something about it. We made a difference.
Joel, can I go back to something? You said that Generation Joshua actually gets invited into a local school there. Is that something that, like if a parent has kids in a local public school and they want to approach the principal or the educators there about the possibility of having your program come in, is that something they could do, and how would they go about that?
Yes, certainly. We'd love to. We've navigated the public school bureaucracy, for lack of better terms. We've got programs that are designed that can accomplish the ends and means that are necessary in a way that is legally permittable and accomplishes, all of their different rules and regulations and insurance requirements and all the rest of it. But we would love to come. We started a sponsorship or a partnership with a local public school here years ago, and it was just that the government teacher said, we've got to have a better way of teaching. And what drew her to us was these immersive simulations, kind of the hands-on, let's do it. We have a program that is a judicial program, and it's a mock federal grand jury set in Chicago back in the 20s. So it's a mob case, and the kids actually get to do it. And it's also the only time I think I've ever walked into a public school carrying a Thompson submachine gun. To be fair, wasn't real. I never knew that, but it's immersive. We come in as a judge and prosecutors and witnesses and characters, and these kids are having to wrestle through a case and then take the idea of what is justice. Like, that's actually not easy to answer sometimes, and apply it to a case with real people involved as far as they can tell. And that was the beginning of a very long and really beneficial relationship. And every year, this teacher partners with us. She brings her class, or 2 or 3 classes, depending, to do one of our programs on foreign policy and one of our programs on the justice system and how it works and where it comes from and why. And we teach about it in a practical setting. You see what happens when justice is abused. You see what happens when justice is missing. And how important those things are. And we do programs in a dozen different ways.
Well, that's really encouraging, and I know we've got some more questions, but are you able to talk about the Lord in these programs and about God and the role of God in an individual's life and as well as in public policy?
We can talk about it in certain forms. We do have lines we have to be careful of, to be honest. We can't, preach is maybe the right word. We can't do that. We can talk about where we find these ideas coming from. Okay, if we're talking about, these ideas came from kind of a Judeo-Christian approach to the world and the Western philosophy of this idea of freedom and where it comes from and what the background principles of that are. This idea of a codified law and what that looks like. And so yes, justice rather naturally lends itself to who defines justice. Well, that's a great question. And if you can't answer that, you can't really give me any form of justice. So in that sense, all we have to do is set the stage, and generally the students get there on their own. But we have to frame the question.
That's really good. All right, we've got we do have a lot of questions. This is really a hot topic with our audience tonight. And so we've got Michael on AWM chat that asks this. He says, Joel, what is a percentage of students that go politics? And do you have any testimonies of those that have attended your classes?
I've actually got quite a few. If you want to go see it, you're welcome to do so. I have them on my website as far as information, but they find it to be one of the most eye-opening experiences and very immersive. I should have printed them off. I have piles of testimonies of students talking about how much they learned and how much it made them think and engage them. We talk about human rights and what are those and why do they matter? Why do humans have worth and rights worth protecting? Where does that come from? We talk about justice. We talk about the idea of just war. Where does that come from? What's the tradition coming out of kind of the Judeo-Christian background there? And the students respond to that. In fact, we have a whole list of testimonials, as it were, of people talking about how their lives have been changed. As far as students going into politics, Generation Joshua is designed for two types of people. Someone who wants to go into politics and someone who doesn't. Because
pretty well covers it.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
What I thought. The idea being that if you're an American citizen, you're in politics. Of the people, by the people, for the people.
Really good.
Excellent.
Congratulations, you're in. Whether you want it or not, this is now part of your responsibility in life.
I love that.
So in a sense, everyone's in it. We will have 1,000 kids every year go get involved in races. That's out of 3,000 to 5,000 students in the program. That's anywhere from a third to 20%.
That's awesome.
I don't know any other program that can do that sort of deliverable, to be honest. We see students that run for office. We see people in elected office at the county and municipal level all around the country. We see some at the state level, actually in state houses, that are graduates of our program that have worked their way up there. We've only been around for about 15 years, so getting into the Congress and the Senate, there's like age limits constitutionally, so we aren't quite there yet. We'll get there. But we see people, our students as staff on the Hill. Like I was in D.C. 2 or 3 years ago, and I had about 200 people that we were in the Capitol building. We were taking them to a meeting with the majority leader of the House a couple of years ago. And we needed to move them from one side of the the Capitol Hill campus to another. The rule was you only could take 12 people through the tunnel per escort, some staffer who had an ID, And so we said, okay, we can do that. And we have 200 people. So we pulled out our phones and we basically called up every Gen J alumni that we knew that was working on Capitol Hill.
Oh, that's
awesome.
awesome.
Said, we need to move 200 people.
Oh, wow.
And I had 35 staffers show up and we moved 200 people down those tunnels.
Oh, that's
my
great.
Goodness.
It's because they've been placed, because the people that are inspired to get involved have been equipped to where they say, oh, you've been involved in Gen J. Excellent. We'd love to have you. Could you please come and interview? We'd love to give you that position. Why? Because we know the quality that we're going to get. And that makes it, we have people that are currently working in the White House that were students of ours, that are working in the Senate and the House, on the committee staff, that are working in the think tanks in DC, that are working in the state policy councils around the country, that are working internationally on human rights initiatives, working with the projects that are involved in the UN globally. These are students who've taken their responsibility as Christians and as citizens seriously.
Oh, Joel,
Excellent.
that is excellent. Okay, so Cowboy Tom, who is on chat, says this. Could Joel please speak to the use of psychology being brought into the government schools? He says, I've observed what I see as use of psych manipulation, brainwashing into the social justice snowflake agenda in public high school students, something that was not so aggressively employed back when I was in school. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Well, at one of our summer camps at iGovern, I teach a class that's, I think called Leadership 401. But the idea is an introduction to high school students of effective leadership. And on the way through, we talk about how to motivate people. And I give a warning right at the beginning of that class. I said, understand that this can be used for incredible good or great evil. The ability to inspire and move people is an incredibly powerful tool, but it's a tool. It doesn't really have a moral base to it. How you use it employs that. And so there are powerful techniques to inspire and motivate people to good or to ill. At least with our program, we introduce students to those techniques. Partly because when you encounter them, you now know what you've just seen. You know what's trying to move you. And also we say, you need to understand how to use it well, how to inspire people, to uplift them, to encourage them, rather than to manipulate them. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think you see people that are willing to abandon any sort of like moral basis when they use it. This idea of a culture of outrage as a standing methodology for how we live, like that's not healthy. In fact, it's incredibly dangerous for a society, for a culture, for any individual person. There's everything from like biochemical impacts on the body to be permanently angry on down to a society that dissolves at the seams. You can't actually have any sort of beneficial interaction back and forth. Even for people you disagree with, how do you have a respectful encounter with people you disagree with? And we teach that. In fact, even on the council, I on my city council, I work with people that are politically very different from me. Some of them are very similar. Some of them are not at all. And ironically, I have some of the best relationships with the people that philosophically are miles apart from me. Why? Because at the beginning of that conversation, we established the fact that we could respect one another and respectfully disagree. Mm-hmm. And although we'll disagree wildly on federal politics, we send Christmas cards to each other. We ask how each other's family is doing. And this kind of civil society, it's a little bit of a comeback, at least in our little town. And frankly, we could use it a lot more.
Boy, that's great, Joel. That's awesome. Great. We only have a couple minutes left. This has gone so fast, but I'm going to share this question. I'll direct it to you first, Richard.
Okay.
And we'll have to keep it brief because of our time here. But Ruthie on chat says this: what would you say to people who claim to be anti-abortion and pro-life, but disagree with illegalizing abortion because it would just lead to back alley abortions? How would you respond to that? Richard, I'll start with you.
Right. Well, that's a good question, Ruthie, and it's a common argument that people make. But really, it's a moral issue, and it comes down to does the convenience and considerations of personal well-being of the mother, aside from a threat to her life, is that morally greater concern than the right of the child to live? And to the response that says, well, you'll have back alley abortions, that's a risk, but all government action, the purpose of government is to protect life, including the life of the unborn. And so unfortunately, that response about back alley abortions just doesn't carry it morally. The second thing is that it's not empirically true, that we can restrict abortion, and it doesn't necessarily mean that women are going to be going to back alleys and getting abortions. We don't have time to go into it in detail. But.
We don't. Okay, and real quick, we just have about 49 seconds left, but Richard,
yes,
you sent an email out to Andrew's List in Colorado here recently because they're introducing some very dangerous things into the education system. Right. Can you tell us real briefly about that?
Yes, so there's HB 1032 has been introduced in the Colorado House of Representatives, and it's comprehensive human sexuality. It's basically a UN-originated program to indoctrinate our youth and in explicit sexual activity and techniques. And this particular version of it mandates that students be educated in homosexual, bisexual, and transgender experiences. And we need to fight this with everything we've got, Karen.
Yeah, so if you are on Andrew's List, go to the website, and Richard tells you how to go ahead and talk to your congressman. Joel, thank you for joining us. Again, generationjoshua.org. Good night and God bless you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net.